My name is Michael, 21 years old, and a junior at Westlake University where I'm majoring in media studies with a minor in creative writing. Until 3 weeks ago, my biggest concern was maintaining my GPA, WHILE, balancing a part-time job at the campus bookstore, and an active social life. Now my biggest concern is the fact that I can't look my roommate in the eye without blushing furiously, which is problematic since we share a cramped dorm room, and he knows exactly why I'm blushing. I should probably back up and explain how I ended up in this extremely completed. Sean and I had been randomly assigned as roommates at the beginning of the academic year. We were complete strangers. He was a transfer student from a community college on the West Coast. I'd been at Westlake since freshman year. On paper, we couldn't have been more different. Sean was a computer science major who woke up at 6 o'clock a.m. Togo running, kept his side of the room meticulously organized, and spent most of his free time coding or at the gym. I was stereotypical art student who stayed up until 3 a.m. writing, maintained what I preferred to call a creative organization system chaos, according to Sean, and spent my free time at coffee shops or film screenings. Despite these differences, I'd settled into a surprisingly complete roommate relationship. On wasn't bothered by my late-night typing as long as I used headphones, and he didn't mind his early morning routine as long as he kept the overhead lights off. We weren't exactly friends. We didn't hang out together outside the room, but were cordial, occasionally sharing take-it or comparing notes on particularly awful professors. There was an aspect of Sean I couldn't help but notice, however. Objectively, I tried to view the situation. He was ridiculously attractive, tall with broad shoulders, from swimming competitively in high school, dark hair that curled slightly. It grew too long and green, iced hat crinkled at the corners when he laughed. He had the kind of jawline that looked like it had been chiseled from marble, and the kind of abs that made me avert my eyes when he walked shirtless from the shower to his closet. He wasn't in the habit of crushing on straight guys. It was a waste of emotional energy, so I kept these observations strictly academic. Yes, my roommate was hot. No, I wasn't going to do anything about it. End of internal discussion. Besides, I had my own romantic entanglements to manage for the past 2 months. I'd been video chatting regularly with Alex, a guy I'd met on a dating app. Alex lived about 3 hours away in another college town, making in-person dates difficult with our busy schedules. We'd been planning to meet during the upcoming spring break, but in the meantime our relationship existed primarily through text messages and increasingly intimate video calls. Which brings me to the night that changed everything. It was a Friday in late February. Sean had mentioned he was going to a coding hackathon that would last all weekend. Beginning Friday evening, he'd packed a small overnight bag and left around 6 o'clock, telling me he probably wouldn't be back until Sunday afternoon. I'd wished him luck. To have the room to myself. Fourth weekend, Alex and I had planned on our video calls for that night. With Sean gone, I didn't have to worry about finding a private location or keeping my voice down. I could relax in my own space without constantly checking the door. I spent some time tidying up my version after D'ing, which involved stuffing most things into drawers, showered and changed it into sweatpants and a t-shirt that Alex had on complimented at 900 p.m. I propped my laptop on my desk, dimmed the lights to create what I hoped was a flattering ambience, and called Alex. The first part of our video chat was normal enough, catching up on our weeks, discussing plans for spring break, sharing campus gossip, but about 40 minutes in the conversation took a more intimate turn, as it often did lately. I wish you were here right now, Alex said, his voice dropping to a tone that made me pulse quicken. Or I was there. What would you do if you were here? I asked, playing along with what had become a familiar game between us. Alex smiled slowly. First, I'd kiss you properly, not like those quick goodbye kisses from our coffee date. Then he continued, becoming increasingly explicit about his intentions. I responded in kindred conversation, growing more heated as we described what we wanted to do to each other. It wasn't the first time we'd engaged in this kind of virtual intimacy, but perhaps because I had the room to myself, I was being more vocal, more animated than usual. I was so caught up in the moment that I didn't hear the key in the lock, didn't register the door opening, didn't notice anything until a startled voice said, "Oh." I whipped around to see Sean standing in the doorway, his overnight bag hanging from one shoulder, his eyes wide with surprise. I'll come back later," he stammered, already backing toward the door. "No," I shouted far too loudly. "I mean wait. It's fine, I turned back to my laptop, To find Alex looking confused. I have to go. I told him quickly, my roommate's back. I'll call you tomorrow. I ended the call before he could respond, then turned it back to Sean, my face burning with. Sean stood awkwardly by the door, looking everywhere but at meth. Hackathon got postponed because of a power outage in the CS building. He explained, setting his bag down. Carefully, they're trying to reshade you for next weekend. Oh, I said stupidly, that sucks, Aya. He hesitated, then added, I should have texted before coming back. No, it's Aya, room 2. I said quickly, I just wasn't expecting you. An excruciating silence fell between us. I had no idea how much Sean had heard before he announced his presence, but based on his evident discomfort, it was enough. That was Alex. He asked finally, surprising by acknowledging what he'd walked in on, rather than pretending it hadn't happened. I nodded, grateful for the dimmed lighting that hopefully least some of my blusher. We've been talking for a couple months, long distance thing. He's at Eastern State. We were planning to meet up during spring break. Sean nodded, then moved to his desk and began unpacking his laptop, apparently deciding the conversation was over. I sat frozen, unsure whether to be relieved or worried by his casual acceptance. How much had he heard? What exactly did he think was happening? And did I care so much about his opinions? Rest of the evening passed in strained silence. Sean put on headphones and seemed absorbed in something on his computer, while I pretended to read a book for class, not registering a single word. Eventually I mumbled something about being tired and went to bed early, facing the wall and trying to will to sleep despite the mortification still coursing through me system. I woke the next morning to an empty room. Sean had already left, probably for his usual morning run. His absence gave me time to process the previous night's disaster and formulation plan. Obviously the mature approach would be to acknowledge the awkward situation, laugh it off, and move forward. Just two guys being guys, nothing to see her. But when Sean returned, sweaty and slightly breathless from his run, I found myself. He nodded a greeting, grabbed his shower caddy, and disappeared again. By the time he returned, dressed and tolling his damp hair, I had decided that, pretending nothing had happened, waste better strategy. After all, this might have worked if the day had proceeded normally, but as Sean sat at his desk and I contemplated escaping to Thelebury, his phone rang. He answered with a, "Hey, what's up?" That suggested it was a friend, not family. I tried not to stop focusing on gathering my books, but it was impossible not to hear his side of the conversation in our small room. No, the whole thing got cancelled. Yeah. Total waste of time. I don't know, probably just hang here, catch up on some coding. No. Frank's Horeso. There was a longer pause. It's not like that. Seriously, drop it. I'm hanging up. Now he ended the call with a scythe and turned to find me watching Himsry. About that, he said, my friend Tyler's trying to convince me to come to Zone Party tonight. You can go if you want, I offered, seizing the opportunity. Be alone again. Don't stay here on my account. Sean shook his head. Nah, no, truly in the party mood, unless you want room to yourself. Again there was a hint of something in his tone, not quite a teasing, but not entirely neutral. No, it's fine, I said quickly, heat rising to my face again at the implication I was actually about to head to Thelebury to work on a paper call. I'll probably be here coding. I gathered my things and fled, spending the next 6 hours in the library despite finishing me work in 3 simply to avoid the tension waiting in our room. When I finally returned, Sean was at his desk, typing rapidly on his laptop. He greeted him with a casual hey. That suggested everything was normal. Maybe it was. Maybe it was overthinking the entire situation. Maybe Sean truly didn't care that he'd caught me in an intimate moment with another guy, and my embarrassment was entirely one-sided. This comforting theory lasted exactly until bedtime, when Sean, who normally fell asleep within of lying down, seemed uncharacteristically restless. I was still awake myself, staring at the ceiling and contemplating how many days remained until the end of the semester when I could request a new roommate and never face this awkwardness again. Sean's voice came through. "Darkness, you awake?" I considered to be asleep, but decided against it. Yeah, there was a pause. "Then can I ask you something?" My stomach tightened with dread. "Sure." Another pause. You gay?" The question hung in the air between us. It wasn't asked with malicious judgment. If anything, Sean sounded genuinely curious, but it still made my heart race with anxiety. "Yeah," I said finally, my voice coming out steadier than I expected. "Is that a problem?" Notion replied immediately. "Not at all, he just wasn't sure. You've never mentioned a dating anyone before." "I don't exactly broadcast it," I said. but I'm not hiding it either. It just hasn't come up. Right, another pause. Sorry. If that was an inappropriate question, it's fine. I hesitated, then added, and sorry Abutuet, you walked in on yesterday, that wasn't it? How I planned to have that. Sean laughed softly. Sound unexpectedly reassuring. Don't worry about it, we're in college, peer Play-Doh things. It's cool. The tension in my chest eased slightly. Thanks, I thought. Conversation was over, but after a moment Sean spoke again. Can I ask some? Else you're full of questions, darn it, I observed, trying to keep my tone light. Last one, I promise. Go. Sean took a deep breath that was audible in the quiet room. Have you ever been attracted to me? The question hit me like a physical blow. My mind resetting to formulate a response that wouldn't make the next 3 months unbearable. The truth that yes, of course, I found him attractive, but I'd never acted on it because I respected our maid relationship and assumed he was straight, seemed too revealing. But lying felt wrong too. It's not like that, I said finally, deliberately echoing what I'd heard him say on the phone. Earliero, my roommate, I wouldn't. It's okay if you have binged on, said quickly. I'm not freaking out or anything, I was just curious. Something in his tone made Mefren into the darkness. Why are you asking? The silence that followed was so long. I thought he might not answer when Ned did. His voice was quieter than before. Because I heard what you were saying on your video call before. I interrupted. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? I was outside the door for a minute or two before I came in. Sean admitted I wasn't eavesdropping on purpose. I swear I was about to use my key when I heard voices. He didn't want to just barge in. If you someone over, oh God, I groaned, mortification washing over me anew. What exactly had he heard? How explicit had Alex and I been at that point? And Sean continued, his voice now barely above a whisper. I heard you describing Zamin, who sounded a lot like me. If there had been a convenient hole in Thefla, I would have gladly let it swallow him whole. My mind raced back through the conversation with Calix, trying to remember what I'd said. Had I realized describe someone who sounded like Shawnee? Didn't think I'd mentioned Sean specifically, but had I described a physique similar to his dark hair, green eyes? I wasn't talking about you, I said firmly, though even to my own ears it sounded defensive. I was talking to Cliffs about Alex. Okay, Sean said, in a tone that suggested he didn't believe me. Like I said, it's not a big deal either way. But it clearly was a big deal, or he wouldn't have brought it up. The thought that Stan had been wondering about this for the past 24 hours made me want Toddy Sapir. What must he think of me, that Ty was secretly lusting after him, while pretending to be interested in Sammy Niels? That I was the worst kind of creepy roommate. I'm going to sleep, he announced, rolling to face the wallow, effectively ending the conversation. Early class tomorrow, it's Saturday, Sean pointed out. Study group, emended Night Frank. I lay awake for hours, my mind spinning with embarrassment and confusion. By the time I finally drifted off, I decided the only solution was to spend as little time in the room as possible until I called request a new housing assignment. This plan lasted exactly until the next morning, when I woke to find Sean sitting on the edge of my bed, fully dressed, watching me with an intensity that made my breath catch. What time is it? I mumbled, disoriented by his proximity. Almost 10. He replied, your study group must have waiting. I had forgotten my hasty excuse from the night before. Right, he should get going, or Sean said, not moving from his spot. We could talk about what's really going on here. I pushed myself up to sitting position, creating some much needed distance between us. Nothing's going on, everything's fine. Sean raised an eyebrow. Really? Because they are acting weird? And I think it's because of what I said last night. I'm not acting weird, I protested, even as I recognized the obvious lie. But yes, it was pretty weird to hear that my roommate was eavesdropping on a private tech conversation, then accused me of fantasizing about him. I wasn't eavesdropping, Sean corrected, and I didn't accuse you of anything. I asked a question. Well, I answered it. I wasn't talking about you two, Alex. Sean studying for a moment, then sighed. Okay, mistake. He stood up, creating more distance between us. But for the recorder, if you had been talking about me, it wouldn't have bothered me. To decipher his meaning. Why would it bother you either way, unless you thought I was being creepy? I wouldn't think it was creepy, Sean said quietly. It would be flattering. The air in the room seemed to thicken as I registered the implication of his words. Flattering. Sean ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd noticed he madwin. Nervous look. I'm not great at this. Reason Tyler was giving me on the phone yesterday is because I've mentioned you to him before. More than once he apparently mentioned me. How? I asked, my heart beginning to race for an entirely different reason than embarrassment. Sean met my eyes, his expression, a mixture of determination and vulnerability, as someone I'm interested in, as more than a roommate. The words didn't compute at first. Sean was interested in me. The absurdity of this statement made me wonder if I was still asleep and dreaming this entire conversation. But you're straight, I said, the first coherent thought that formed in my confused brain. Sean loud, the sound surprised rather than mocking. What gave you that idea? I didn't know, I said, feeling suddenly defensive. You never mentioned dating Giso. Have pictures of women on your Instagram, you just seem straight. I'm B. Sean clarified, and those women on Instagram are mostly my sister and cousins. I haven't dated anyone since transferring here because I've been focused on adjusting to a new school, and then, well, there was my incredibly attractive roommate who either was straight until I accidentally walked in on him having phone sex with someone while describing Zamin, who sounded suspiciously like him. I stared at him, trying to process this radical reshaping of our shared reality. Was not having phone sex, I protested weakly, grasping at the least important part of his statement. Sean's lips twitched. What would you call it then? Video? Flirting? I offered, then shook my head. That's not the point. The point is... It trailed off suddenly, uncertain what the point was. The point, Sean said, taking a step closer to my bed, is that I, like Yui, have since the beginning of semester, and based on what I heard, which again, I wasn't trying to hear, I think there's a possibility you might like Mutu. If I'm wrong, I'll drop it, and we can back to being just roommates. But if I'm right, he left the sentence, a question in his eyes. The man stretched between us. Taut with possibility, my mind raced through the implications. Sean was attracted to me, had been for months apparently, and I despite my best efforts to suppress it, was definitely attracted to him. But there was also Alex, whom I'd been talking to for months and was planning to meet in person, and the complication of being roommates. What if we tried something and it went badly? We'd still have to live together until the end of semester. What about Alex? I asked, voicing the most immediate concern. Sean's expression remained neutral. What about him? Are you exclusive? Not officially, I admitted. We haven't met in person yet, but we've been talking for a while. So talk to him. Sean suggested. Figure out where you stand. I'm not asking you to make a decision right now. I just wanted you to know where I stand. The maturity of his approach surprised me. I had expected what an ultimatum, a dramatic declaration. Instead, Sean was being thoughtful, considerating me space to process this revelation. I don't know what to say, I confessed. You don't have to say anything right now, Sean assured me. I'm going to the gym, so you'll have the room to yourself for a couple hours. Think a booty or don't. Either way, we're good. He grabbed his gym bag from beside his desks. You later, I nodded, still to Donato form a coherent response with a final small smile. Sean left, the door closing behind him. For several minutes, Izette frozen in place, replaying the conversation in my mind. Sean was interested in me. Sean had heard me describing someone like him to Alex. Sean thought I was incredibly attractive. The realization of just how much my perception of our relationship had been wrong hit me like a physical force. All these months I'd been carefully maintaining professional routine, boundaries, suppressing any attraction, assuming it was one-sided. Meanwhile, Sean had apparently been about me to his friends, noticing me as more than just the guy who shared his living space. I reached for my phone, intending to call Alex and explained this situation, but stopped before dialing. What exactly would I say? Hey, remember that roommate I mentioned? Turns out, Alex, me and I might like him to solace cancel our spring break plans. It seemed callous, especially given our conversation from Friday night. Instead, I texted him, asking if we could video chat later that day. His response came quick. Was busy with family until evening, but could talk around 8. That gave me several hours to figure out what he wanted to do. I spent those hours in a state of heightened self-aware and stemming my feelings for both Alex and Sean with the scrutiny I'd previously. Alex was safe in a way. The distance between us had allowed for a slow-building connection without the immediate complications of physical proximity. Sean, by contrast, was right here, a daily presence in my life with all the messy potential that. But if I was honest with myself, attraction to Sean had been there from the beginning, something I deliberately pushed aside because it seemed impractical, impossible. Now that I knew it was reciprocated, the feeling rushed back with an intensity that was hard to ignore. When Sean returned from gym, I was still sitting on my bed, though I'd at least manage it. of my sleep clothes, he greeted me casually, as if our earlier conversation hadn't dramatically altered the dynamic between us, and headed for the shower. Without pressing for a response, his consideration only made my growing certainty stronger. After his shower, Sean suggested we grab lunch at the dining hall, maintaining the normal routine of our weekends when either of us had specific plans. The familiar activity gave us a chance to interact without the pressure of addressing the emotional elephant. In theorem, to my surprise, conversation flowed easily, focusing on classes, campus, gossip, and a new movie we were both interested in. Seeing it was during this ordinary lunch, watching Sean laugh at something said, gesturing with his fork as a point about his programming project, that I realized how well I felt with him. There was an ease between us that had always been there at Maribeth, the careful boundaries I directed, and now with those boundaries crumbling, the potential for something more felt both thrilling and somehow natural. Back in our room that afternoon, Sean settled at his desk to work on coding, giving me space without being copious about it. I appreciated enormously the lack of pressure, even as my thoughts continued to circle around the decision ahead of me. At 7:45, I told Sean I needed to make a private calendar, asked if he would mind giving me the room for a bit understanding. Immediately nodded and grabbed his laptop. I'll go to the common room for a while. Text me. You're done. After he left, I sat at my desk, heart pounding, as I waited for 8 o'clock, when my computer chimed with Alex's incoming call. I took a deep breath before answering. The conversation that followed was difficult but honest. I explained to Alex that something unexpected had happened, that my feelings for my roommate had become impossible to ignore, and that I didn't think it was fair to continue our romantic plans. Given this development, X was understandably disappointed, but not entirely surprised. I wondered if something was up when you ended our call so abruptly on Friday. He admitted, and to be honest, you've mentioned your roommate a lot more than you probably realized. The observation made me wooey, with the recognition that perhaps I hadn't been as subtle as I thought. After reassuring each other that there were no feelings, we agreed to take some space but possibly reconnect as friends. The future of the call ended on a note of mutual respect, that while bittersweet comfort I was making the right decision. I texted Sean afterward, a simple all done that carried more significance than the words themselves. Veshin, he returned a few minutes later. His expression was carefully neutral, giving the opportunity to set the tone. It talked to Alex, I said as he closed the door behind him. We decided not to persuade him. Sean nodded, his restraint visible in the tension of his shoulders. Because of what we talked about this morning. Partly, I acknowledged, but also because I been using the distance with Alexis a safe way to avoid the risk of something real, something closer to home. Sean's expression softened with understanding, and now I took a steadying breath. Now I think I'd like to see what might happen if I stop avoiding that risk. The smile that spread across Sean's face was worth every moment of anxiety and confusion that had preceded it. He crossed the room in a few quick strides, stopping just short of where I stood. Just to be clear, he said, his voice lower than usual, when you say something closer to home, you mean merit, because I don't want there to be any more misunderstandings between us. He lowered the tension of the past to days finally breaking. Yes, Sean, I mean you. Good, he said simply, and then he was kissing me, his hands cupping my face with a gentleness that contrasted with intensity of his lips against me. The kiss was better than anything he'd imagined during the months of suppressed attraction, and yes, I had imagined it despite my attempts not. Toshin's mouth was warm and confident against mine, his body solid and real as my hands found his waist, pulling him closer. When we finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Sean pressed his forehead against mine. For the record, he murmured, the reality is much better than whatever you might have been describing to Alex. I groaned, heterizing to my face once again. Can we please never mention that again? I'm mortified. Sean laughed, pressing out a quick kiss to my lips. No promises, it might become part of our origin story. Our origin story begins with you eavesdropping outside our room. I counted even as I smiled at the implication that we would have a story to tell. Details Sean dismissed with agrin. The important part is that we got there eventually, as his lips found mine again, more insistent this time. I had to agree the path had been unexpected, gross and complicated, but here in our shared room, with boundaries redefined and possibilities acting before us, was exactly where he wanted Tobe. My name is Frank, I'm 21 years old and a junior at Westlake University. 3 weeks ago, My biggest concern was hiding my attraction to my roommate while maintaining a long-distance flirtation with someone else. Now my biggest concern is remembering to hang a sock on Theodoroknub when Sean and I don't want to be interrupted. A courtesy I appreciate far more after being on the side of that particular awkward situation. It's not the roommate arrangement I expected when the year began, but as Sean likes to remind me, sometimes the best things happen when you least expect.